Hello, students, and welcome to Story Time with Miss.Rain. Today we are going to read Beatrix Potter's Tale of Benjamin Bunny. Oh, yes, you in the back. No, I don't think she's related to Harry Potter, but she could be. Alright, let's begin. One morning, a little rabbit sat on a bank. He pricked his ears and listened to the trot of a pony. A gig was coming along the road, and it was driven by Mr. McGregor. Beside him sat his wife, Mrs. McGregor, in her best bonnet. As soon as they had passed, little Benjamin Bunny slid down the road and set off with a hop, a skip, and a jump to call upon his relations who lived in the wood in the back of Mr. McGregor's garden. A wood was full of rabbit holes. The neatest, sandiest hole of all lived Benjamin's aunt and his cousin, Flopsy, Mopsy, Little Cottontail, and Peter. Old Mrs. Rabbit was a widow. She earned her living by knitting rabbit wool mittens. Medivhs. I once bought a pair at bazaar. She also sold herbs and rosemary tea, rabbit tobacco, even. We call that lavender. Little Benjamin did not very much want to see his aunt. He came around the back of the fir tree and nearly tumbled on top of his cousin Peter. Peter was sitting by himself. He looked poorly, dressed in a red cotton pocket handkerchief. Peter, said little Benjamin in a whisper, who has got your clothes? Peter replied, the scarecrow in Mr. McGregor's garden, and described how he had been chased out of the garden and had dropped his clothes and coat. Little Benjamin sat beside his cousin and assured him that Mr. McGregor had gone out in a gig, and Mrs. McGregor also, and certainly in the day because she was wearing her very best bonnet. Peter said he hoped it would rain. At this point, old Mrs. Rabbit's voice heard inside the rabbit hole, calling, Cottontail, Cottontail, fetch some more chamomile. Peter said he thought he might feel better if he went for a walk. They went away hand in hand and got upon the flat top of the wall on the bottom of the wood. From here, they looked down at Mr. McGregor's garden. Peter's coat and shoes, plain as day on the scarecrow, topped with an old tam hat of Mr. McGregor's, tattered and worn down. Little Benjamin said, it spoils people's clothes to squeeze under a gate, and the proper way to get in is to climb down a pear tree. Peter fell down, head first, but it was of no consequence, as the bed below was newly raked and quite soft. It had been sown with lettuce leaves. They left a great many odd little footmarks in the bed, especially little Benjamin, who had been wearing his clogs. Little Benjamin said that the first thing to be done was to get Peter's clothes in order that they might use the pocket handkerchief. They took off the scarecrow, and there had been begun to rain that night. There was water in the shoes, and the coat was somewhat shrunk. Benjamin tried on the tattered old hat, but it was far too big for him. He suggested they should fill the pocket handkerchief with onions as his present for his aunt. Peter did not seem to enjoy himself, as he kept hearing noises. Benjamin, on the contrary, was perfectly at home. He ate lettuce leaf. He said that it was a habit of coming to the garden with his father to get lettuce for their Sunday dinners. The lettuce was certainly very fine in the garden. Peter did not eat anything. He said he'd like to go home. Presently, he dropped half the onions. Little Benjamin said that it was not possible to get back to the pear tree with the loads of vegetables. He led the way boldly toward the end of the garden, where they went along the little plank under the sunny red brick wall. The mice sat at their doorstep, cracking cherry stones. They winked at Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin Bunny. Presently, Peter let the pocket handkerchief go again. They got amongst the flower pots, the frames, and the tubs, when Peter heard noises, worse than ever, his eyes as big as lollipops. He was sat in front of two of his cousins, when suddenly he stopped. This is who the rabbit saw around the corner. A cat. Little Benjamin took one look, and then in half a minute less no time he hid himself and Peter and the onions underneath a very large basket. The cat got up and stretched itself, and came to sniff the basket. Perhaps she liked the smell of onions. As she sat atop the basket, she sat for 4, 5 hours. I cannot draw you a picture of Benjamin under the basket, because it was quite dark and the smell of the onions was tearful. It made Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin cry. The sun got up and rose around behind the wood. It was quite late in the afternoon, but still the cat sat upon the basket. At length there was a pitter-patter, but some bits of mortar fell from above the wall. The cat looked up and saw Mr. Benjamin Bunny prancing along the top of the wall on the upper terrace. He was smoking a pipe of his rabbit tobacco and had a little switch in his hand. He was looking for his son. Old Benjamin Bunny had no opinion whatsoever of cats. He took the tremendous jump off the wall and onto the top of the cat and cuffed it off the basket, kicked into the greenhouse, scratching off a handful of fur. Oh, the poor kitty. The cat was too surprised to scratch back. When old Mr. Bunny had driven the cat into the greenhouse, he locked the door and came hopping, skipping, and jumping to the basket. He came back to the basket and took out his son Benjamin by the ears and whipped him with the little switch. Then he took out his nephew Peter. He then took out the handkerchief of onions and marched right out of the garden. When Mr. McGregor returned, about half an hour later, he observed several things which left him perplexed, confused. It looked as though some person had been walking all over his garden in a pair of clogs, only the footmarks were ridiculously too little. He also could not understand how the cat might have gotten itself shut in the greenhouse, locking the door upon the outside. Peter got home to his mother, and she forgave him, because she was so glad to see that he had found his shoes and his coat. Cottontail and Peter folded up the pocket handkerchief, and old Mrs. Rabbit strung up the onions and hung them in the kitchen ceiling, with the bunches of herbs and rabbit tobacco. This story was written by Beatrix Potter. Good night, kids, and sleep well, and thank you for listening to Storytime with Miss.Rain.